Welcome to Extraterrestrial Reality. In this past week, there's been news that to come out of a county in Texas with regard to mutilated cows. And again, I believe it's another case of extraterrestrials doing this, being responsible. And this has been going on a long time. I've talked about this a number of times recently, but I think this story is pretty interesting. So we're going to go through it and then talk about it. The headline reads, Cows in Texas had their tongues, genitals, and anuses removed with precision cuts, but there was no blood left behind at the bizarre scene, officials say. And this is from Insider. And of course, I'll leave the link to this. Actually, it's being reported by a lot of different news outlets. There's several Texas outlets you could read about this in. The NBC News has reported on this. And this goes along with some other recent cases. There was some recent mutilations in Colorado. Just recently, I talked about an Australian couple who've seen 20 of their cows mutilated since 2018. I was talking about that recently, and here we go again. Another incident. And anyway, we'll go through this story and then talk about it. It says here, 6 cattle were found dead in suspicious scenes across Madison County, Texas this week, each with their tongues removed and no signs of a struggle, according to officials. Madison County Sheriff's Department officials said in a statement posted to Facebook on Wednesday that each of the 6 cows had been found lying on its side, deceased and mutilated. The first cow, a 6-year-old longhorn, was found by its owners on their ranch. And then here's a direct quote from the statement from the Sheriff's Department. It says, a straight, clean cut with apparent precision had been made to remove the hide around the cow's mouth on one side, leaving the meat under the removed hide untouched. The tongue was also completely removed from the body with no blood spill. It was noted that there were no signs of struggle, and the grass around the cow was undisturbed. No footprints or tire tracks were noted in the area. Now, again, this is the same kind of phenomenon that has been occurring for decades, and it's happening again right now in front of us. I think that, I've brought this up before. I think if you're going to want to study UFOs, I think these ranches where these cattle mutilations are occurring should be hotspots, and it'd be nice if more scientists would pay attention, I believe, to these places, because I think that you might be able to find something out, but obviously it's always instead of proactive, it's always reactive. It's always, okay, after the fact, and cops get involved, law enforcement gets involved, they investigate, and they don't have any answers. And the answers they usually have really make no sense, and there's no proof nobody has ever been busted yet. After all these years, no one has ever been caught or arrested for mutilating cattle. So apparently it's not people. And in a lot of these cases, which we'll get into later on, there are UFO sightings, and then the next day there are dead cattle. Anyway, continuing with this article, it says, while officials were investigating the first cow's death, reports of 4 additional adult cows and 1 yearling in similar condition were reported across Brazos County as well as Robertson County, each incident occurring in different locations, pastures, and herds, with no signs of a disturbance nearby. And here's a comment from the Madison County Sheriff's Department, another statement. It says, on 2 of the 5 cows, a circular cut was made removing the anus and the external genitalia. This circular cut was made with the same precision as the cuts noted around the jaw lines of each cow. Just like the first, there were no signs of struggle or disturbance in the grass, no blood spill, and no noticeable tracks. No predators or birds would scavenge the remains for several weeks after death. And that's another strange thing about all of these occurrences with these cattle mutilations. No predators. I mean, the predators don't seem to be interested in these cows that are mutilated, which is very interesting. No sign of blood, no sign of struggle. And again, this has been something going on for a long time, but yet we, as a whole, we're not accepting what's the reality of this situation. And in fact, some people in the UFO community do not accept the notion that it's extraterrestrial. In fact, I was recently, as I brought up last time when I talked about cattle mutilations, In a recent interview I had with Preston Dennett, who is a great UFO researcher, one of the best. He thinks it's the government that's responsible for these mutilations. I don't believe that. I think it's pretty clear that it's aliens. In fact, there are some cases where people actually see aliens. There was a case with Linda Moulton Howe that she had investigated, where there were two people, husband and wife, back in the 1980s, early 90s, had seen alien beings actually taking a cow onto a craft. And in broad daylight. I mean, so I believe that the aliens are responsible, and I also believe that that it's very possible that they're using them as a food source. That could be what it's for. I mean, if they're anything like us, or even if they're not like us, if they're like insects, like some people believe, then I think, of course, that they would be using these things as a source of food. I mean, we use cattle for that. That's the same purpose. We slaughter cattle on a daily basis, all across the world, for food purposes. And maybe that's what they're doing too. But this is how they're doing it, because they're a secretive group. These extraterrestrials. They don't want us to know what they're up to here, and they're taking these cattle. It could be because of that reason, for food purposes. And there's other people I've talked to who believe the same thing. Anyway, continuing with this article, it says here, representatives for the Madison County Sheriff Department declined insiders' request for comment. A similar incident in Oregon was reported in 2019 by the Associated Press. 5 bulls were found, drained of blood and missing their tongues and genitals, prompting theories about their deaths ranging from alien abduction to the occult. Personally, I would lean more toward the occult, where people, for whatever reason, whether it's a phase of the moon or whatever rituals they're going to do with their beliefs, are coming to different areas and doing that. The AP reported Harney County Sheriff's Deputy Dan Jenkins said of the Oregon incident. Now, let's just stop there for a minute. Now, this idea of cults and Satanists, I mean, it's absolutely absurd. I mean, again, this has been something that we've had a spotlight on since the late 1960s. This has been reported. The 1970s was a big period for these cattle mutilations, particularly out in the Midwest, and there's no one's ever been caught. I mean, how could it be Satanists? I think they would have been caught by now. And additionally, there are many times UFO sightings that accompany these incidents. Continuing here with the article, it says in 2021, AP reported 7 more cattle were found dead, missing their tongues, eyes, and blood. It is unclear what may have caused the Texas cattle mutilations, though Madison County Sheriff's Department's officials say an investigation is ongoing. I don't think they're going to find an answer. They're not going to find anybody. There's not going to be any arrests. At the end of this, they'll probably come out like all law enforcement authorities end up doing eventually. They'll say, well, we have no answer. It's most likely predators or Satanists or some other kind of a cult. But I don't think we're ever going to get any serious answers from any law enforcement. I mean, you can't really blame them. I mean, how law enforcement for now well over 50 years has been unable to resolve any of these cattle mutilation cases. Some of them actually every now and then. Now, this guy here that they had the quote from, it's usually they'll say something like that because, of course, the stigma associated. If you say something like, well, there's UFOs reported sometimes, and it could be that. I mean, if you're in law enforcement and you make that kind of a statement, well, you're concerned about the stigma. Now, some people over the decades have made statements saying, well, it could be UFOs. We just don't. Could be aliens. We just don't have any answers. It could be aliens. Some have been brave enough to say that, but you can't really blame law enforcement for making statements like it's Satanist, because they don't want to say aliens, because they're concerned about the stigma, and it makes a lot of sense. So again, we're not doing enough with regard to the cattle mutilations. I believe, like, if we wanted to really get to the bottom of this extraterrestrial presence here, if we really wanted to come up with the indisputable proof, I believe that studying these cattle mutilations with a concerted scientific effort, I think we might be able to get somewhere. But apparently, it's just not happening. It's the scientific community, for the most part, doesn't seem that interested in it, and they haven't been that interested in it for all these decades. But these are obviously, if these are happening in these places, like in Texas right now, in Madisonville County, Texas, if it's happening there, or Madison County, Texas, if it's happening there, why not set up a team to try to get to the bottom of it? I would believe that would be the way to make finally determine what's happening here. I mean, okay, maybe if some people out there will say, hey, well, I think you're wrong, I don't think it's extraterrestrials. Okay, well, why don't we just get to the bottom of this already? This has been going on for over 50 years. And a lot of these cases, the same thing. They're saying in these cases in Texas right now, they're saying that the body parts were removed with precision cuts. That's not something that predators are able to do. I mean, only common sense tells you that there's something weird going on here. But anyway, I want to talk about cases, things that this is nothing new too. I mean, that's another thing about this. This is nothing new, and we're going to get into that. We're going to take a quick break, and we will be right back, and we'll talk about this a little bit more. Okay, we are back. I want to talk about an incident that was ongoing and was pretty big local news in Ellsbury, Missouri, back in 1978. Here's an article that talks about that. I'll leave the link for this. This is ellsburyhistorical.org, and it was written by Lauren Eberhardt. And she goes on here. She says, throughout the 70s, there were a series of strange and unexplainable events happening across the country, including the small town of Ellsbury, Missouri. There were many reports coming in from local farmers of cattle mutilations. The reports that came from the local farmers talked of odd cattle mutilations. These mutilations did not resemble the work of a human. Therefore, it was believed that the mutilations were done by something of greater skill and possibly intelligence. These mutilations consisted of the animal's ears being cut off, normally just one, and an eye from the same side was also taken. Its reproductive organs were taken out and the body was drained of all blood. As well as the strange mutilations, there were also unexplainable dead bugs present at all the mutilation sites in Ellsbury. The inexplicability of these mutilations led many to believe that extraterrestrial beings were the cause of all the madness. Some also thought it was the work of some demented people, and others even thought it was the work of corrupt farmers. Some of the mutilation theories have much more evidence than others, which lead some to believe that the mutilations were indeed done by extraterrestrials, corrupt farmers, or a cult. Well, now, the interesting thing that it's never been resolved. I mean, corrupt farmers. I mean, at the time of these mutilations in Missouri, there were a lot of UFO sightings, and a lot of these people who saw them talked about it on the local news channels. There was a series of clips from the news organization Channel 2, the local news channel in Ellsbury from at that time. And we're going to run, and it's a series of different news clips that played on that channel, and we're going to run through this, and then we'll talk about it after it's over. Nobody has any theories on that, obviously, either.
Have you ever seen anything like this in your life?
No, I haven't. Not till you brought it in here today.
I don't know.
An incredible story.
News Center 2's Ron Barber has been in this story. He's back in Ellsbury, Missouri tonight, and we've got him on the phone. Ron, what is the mood of the people in Ellsbury tonight?
Sherry, there is no doubt the concern here is high, as a nearly full moon has kept total darkness from falling here in Ellsbury. Some farmers will be spending a long night. Many of them spent today counting their herds, making certain that none of the cattle had fallen victims to the mutilation that has claimed at least 5 cows since April 24th. One farmer who reported a heifer missing this afternoon later found it had wandered off to calve. Mother and baby are fine tonight. A sizable number of farmers can be heard on their Citizens Band radios at this hour, waiting to see if a repeat performance by the UFOs is in the offing this night. If so, it would be the 4th or 5th time since June 8th that objects no one around here has ever seen before have appeared long enough to glow a bright, brilliant glow, a gold color, hover, rise, and descend several times, move to the east, move back to the west, and then vanish. It is a story here that no scriptwriter could duplicate. And this one, Sherry, is for real.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us in News Center 2. The bizarre story out of Ellsbury, Missouri concerning mutilated cattle, UFO sightings, and mysterious dead flies has taken another strange twist this evening. Scientists here at the request of News Center 2 now know what killed the flies. However, they say the cause of death is something they have never seen before outside a laboratory. Thousands of dead flies were found in the area around several mutilated cows in Ellsbury. They had apparently fed on the dead cows' carcasses. A short time later, they were found dead by the thousands, sticking to nearby tree limbs almost welded to them. Our tests at Ralston Purina show that the flies died of a fungus. What has scientists baffled is that they have been able to create this condition in laboratories, but they've never seen it happen naturally. It's still not known if the flies carried the fungus to the cow carcasses or from them. It's still all a mystery.
Farmers in Ellsbury are counting their herds, but so far no new cases of cattle mutilations have been reported, nor have there been any further sightings of UFOs, which some people feel may be behind the whole bizarre episode. News Center 2's Ron Barber spent the night in Ellsbury and says the mood of the people is cautious.
Quite a few of the townsfolk of Ellsbury, Missouri gathered at the Manford Hammond residence last night and looked towards the sky. They gazed and really didn't even know what they were looking for. Whatever it was, they didn't see anything other than a bright full moon, somewhat obscured by light haze. There were even a couple of semi-professional UFO seekers, fully equipped with highly professional camera gear. But there was nothing more than a pleasant late spring night's get-together with the neighbors. Just the night before, however, Manford Hammond, his family, and others say the sights were very prolific and very strange.
And they just hovered over the tree, and then it went right straight down, and then it was down about 15 minutes, and then it come right back up, went to the west, and out of sight. And then after a while, we saw it back over here in the east again. It come back up and come over and back down in the west and down.
Every morning, many Ellsbury and area farmers now are making careful head checks on their cattle, in some cases counting them out one by one. In others, keeping their animals very close by.
Well, I've moved them right in front of my house so that it is easier to watch them, and it's awful hard to get a good count on cattle regularly. Mm-hmm. But I've moved them in front of my house where it's close to the house and close to the road, where I think there won't be as much possibility of something happening.
The authoritative UFO sightings have been about every second or third night since early June. So they'll be out looking again tonight and counting animals again tomorrow morning. Those people here who have an explanation for the events that have taken place are not all that certain of their theories. Every piece of logic or reasoning seems to have holes in it. What is known for absolute certain is that every dead cow is costing these farmers hundreds, perhaps thousands of dollars. Ron Barber, News Center 2, Ellsbury, Missouri.
A rural Wentzville farmer has reported what appears to be a cow killing very similar to the recent incidents in Ellsbury. News Center 2's Ron Barber reports.
Or radiation detectors from Terry Morgan at the St. Louis County Office of Civil Preparedness. It is not a difficult instrument to use. That accomplished, we headed out to the Cleet Parr Farm in rural Wentzville. Last Saturday, Mr. Parr followed his nose to the source of a rancid smell down a slight embankment. It was there Mr. Parr discovered the carcass of one of his registered cows, apparently dead about 5 or 6 days at that time. There were similarities to the Ellsbury incidents Mr. Parr noticed immediately. Although you can't see it here, Mr. Parr told me the right ear appeared to have been neatly sliced off. There were at that time hundreds of dead flies stuck to the fence wire near the carcass. When we got there today, a driving rain had washed many of them off, but some were still visible. And now something else Mr. Parr noted that was highly unusual to him.
The cow apparently died, from the looks of it, with its legs underneath it. Is that odd?
Yes, it is. They usually always turn to their side. But just before they die, even if they're laying upright, before they die, and that's the way on what I've seen. They always turn to their side just before they die.
I tried the radiation detector close to the carcass and close to the wire with the flies. I thought I heard more activity near the scene than we detected from afar. I double-checked my feelings with John Morris, a friend who had traveled to Wentzville with our camera crew. He felt there was negligible movement on the meter. Mr. Parr told me there have been no signs of buzzards or large predators near the carcass in the nearly 2 weeks since the animal's death. The cow was only about 8 years of age. Normally, animals of this nature live 14 to 15 years. Mr. Parr summed it up to News Center 2 this way.
Well, it just seems kind of weird, about all I can say about it. It seems weird.
For Ron Barber, News Center 2, Wentzville.
Last night, at least 9 persons saw what they all felt were UFOs in an area west of Ellsbury. The objects bobbed, weaved, and maneuvered up and down for a period of 4 hours from 9 p.m. to 1 this morning. We talked to several of the witnesses. Their descriptions did vary considerably, but they all agreed on one point. Never had they seen anything like the objects that they saw last night.
It was just fantastic. I'd never seen anything like it, and I don't know, maybe it is starting to make a believer out of me, because I just, I didn't expect to see anything when I came up, and yet I saw these lights moving, and they would move in lines, move along, and possibly have red or green lights. This was just an orange, brilliant light. At one point I did see, this is when our group had grown quite a bit, and we had 9 or 10 people there. I think it was around 12 o'clock a.m., and we saw a brilliant light that flashed for 5 to 10 seconds in white, red, green, orange, and it lasted that long, and then it disappeared just as quick.
Early this afternoon, the Lincoln County Sheriff's Department received a report of a dead cow in an area virtually exactly where the reported UFOs were sighted. It appeared odd to this reporter when I saw the dead animal surrounded by a complete circle of dirt in an otherwise grassy pasture. But veterinarian Dr. Newberry, who had investigated earlier alleged mutilations, told me the circle was caused by curious cows milling around the dead cow. He felt the dead animal was struck by lightning. Burn marks underneath the skin appeared to verify that conclusion to the layman. Meantime, at least a dozen members of various UFO groups, mostly from St. Louis, trooped up here today to try to sift through what remains of the carcasses and interview the citizens. T-shirts bearing the emblems Ellsbury UFO Country are being sold here by the dozens. Despite the fact the cow today appears to have been struck by lightning, the whole feeling in the community may have been summed up by one farmer I overheard talking to a group of other farmers today. He said, quote, "All these dang cows just ain't dropping over and dying." Ron Barber, News Center 2, Ellsbury.
Okay, there you have it. I mean, that's very interesting. I mean, that was from 1978. That was various different news reports that showed up on Channel 2. I'll leave a link. I found this on a YouTube channel that somebody had posted 10 years ago, and they compiled all these different, they edited together all these different news reports, and that comes in really handy when trying to talk about this case. But what's an interesting thing about this case too is the fact about the insects, all the flies, the dead flies that were everywhere, stuck to and apparently died from some fungus they got after feeding on the dead carcasses, and then nobody has ever explained that it was something that couldn't happen other than inside of a lab. So that's very interesting. You don't usually hear about that aspect of this phenomenon. But again, that's 45 years ago. 1978 is 45 years ago, and we're not anywhere closer. After all of this time, we're still talking about it. You see, we just talked about what's going on in Texas right now. 45 years ago, they're talking about the same thing in Missouri. And guess what? Probably 45 years from now, we're going to be talking about the same thing someplace else. It's just never ended. We still don't have any explanation for it. I would certainly believe, again, if it was human beings responsible for these mutilations, they would have been busted by now. Okay, maybe if somebody wants to say that some corrupt farmers were responsible, okay, maybe in some cases here and there, but not every farmer, not every rancher is a corrupt person, maybe trying to cash in on some insurance or something. If that's what the allegation is. But it just doesn't make any sense, really, that we're still, after all this time, we're still not anywhere near to where we need to be with this. It's still, and again, you see I just read that first article of something that's going on in Texas right now, and you see all these news reports that were broadcast by this local Channel 2 in Missouri back in 1978 with regard to all these incidents going on in Ellsbury. And it's the same story. It's the same story with there's no resolution to it after all this time. And you hear law enforcement saying the same things then as they say now. We're looking into it. We're trying to find out. No answers ever. And I don't think. I mean, it just seems like there's no interest really from the scientific community. And again, I think this is what's going on in Texas. Maybe if the scientific community were to stake out one of these hot spots where cattle are getting mutilated, maybe we could finally get some answers. But we're not getting answers. Prove it one way or the other. Whether is it Satanist? I don't think so. Okay, but hey, doesn't mean I'm right. It could, maybe it isn't, but you'd be able to prove it one way or the other. Is it predators? Well, I don't think so. I mean, I don't see how predators are capable of making precision cuts, laser type cuts on these animals. I don't think that's possible. But hey, you never know. The only way to get to the bottom of it is to come up with some conclusive proof already. And all these years, all these decades have just keep rolling on by well over 50 years now. 55 years, basically 56 years since 1967. There's been an interest in this. When there was it started, basically the first one that was made the mainstream news was a horse in Colorado that was mutilated in this fashion. And ever since then, people have been studying this, trying to get to the bottom of it. But again, it seems mostly reactionary. The scientific community has shown virtually no interest in it for the most part. There's been some investigators like Linda Moulton Howe that look into it, but still we haven't gotten anywhere. And I don't think as long as we continue this way, it's just going to continue and continue and continue on like this, and we're never going to have any answers. And ranchers are going to be scratching their heads continually, decade after decade after decade after decade. But when in reality, what we should be doing is some of our scientists, there should be some sort of a group put together and to go to one of these spots and finally come up with some kind of determination. Now, I know there have been some things that have gone on at Skinwalker Ranch, but obviously whatever's happened so far, it's just not enough. There needs to be a very strong concerted effort, and then to look into this, to study this, and then possibly we can get to the bottom of it. But until that happens, it's just going to continue like this, and we're never going to have any conclusive evidence as to what is causing this. I think it's extraterrestrial, but hey, that doesn't mean I'm right. It could be something else, but the only way we're ever going to find out is by some scientific study. Anyway, until next time.